Today we are dealing with the issue of the ANC's areas of national constraints. I would like to welcome from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine Mr Paul Dillon, Assistant Secretary General, Mr Fintan O'Brien, Principal Officer, Mr Ari Cashman, Assistant Principal, Mr Thomas Hartley, Assistant Principal. Thank you for coming forward to me today to brief the Committee on the issue of the ANCs. Before we begin, I want to bring to your attention the issue of privilege. Witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of evidence to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed to only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings to be given, and you are asked to respect in parliamentary practice the effect of where possible you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name in such ways to make him or her identifiable. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the House or an official either by name in such ways to make him or her identifiable. Mr Dillon, now I ask you to make an opening statement, please.
Thanks, Chairman. At the outset, I would like to thank the members of the committee for giving us the opportunity here today to update you on the changes to be made to the 2019 Areas of Natural Constraint Scheme. The Areas of Natural Constraint Scheme, ANC scheme, has been in existence in various forms in Ireland since the 1970s. It was previously called the Disadvantaged Area Scheme or the Less Favoured Area Scheme, and in its various iterations it has played a very important income support role for farmers in many areas of the country. To date, in 2018, some €216 million has been paid to 89,000 farmers under the scheme, and over the course of the scheme year, a total of €227 million will be paid to 96,000 farmers. This is indicative of the importance and size of the scheme in Ireland. So why the new approach to designating the eligible lands under the scheme? Well, up until 2018, Ireland had identified areas eligible under the scheme using a range of socio-economic indicators, such as family farm income, population density, percentage of the working population engaged in agriculture, and stocking density, and so on. This approach is now required to change on foot of EU regulations. The genesis of the change in this approach lies in discussions at EU level, whereby concerns are raised by the European Court of Auditors as to the inconsistent approach being taken across Member States in relation to the designation of land using the socio-economic indicators. So, from 2019, the eligible areas must instead be designated using the following list of biophysical criteria. They are low temperature, dryness, excess soil moisture, limited soil drainage, unfavourable texture and stoniness, shallow rooting depth, poor chemical properties and steep slope. So all EU Member States who wish to implement the ANC scheme in 2019 must now use this new approach to identify lands, or else take the other option of continuing the old approach but with sharp cuts to payments for all beneficiaries. The approach of continuing the current system with the sharp cuts across the scheme is not a viable one for Ireland, given the importance of the scheme. So then, how are the eligible areas for 2019 identified? The process of identifying the eligible areas has been carried out at townland level. Essentially, where a townland displays one or more of the biophysical criteria listed above at the level of above 60% threshold set out in the regulation, it is identified as being constrained. In parallel to the biophysical approach, two other processes are set out in the EU regulations have been used to refine the identification of the eligible land. Firstly, a number of areas were identified as having overcome the constraint by reference to high levels of stocking density and arable land cover, and thus not eligible for the 2019 ANC scheme. This is referred to as fine-tuning, so you're fine-tuning out land in the regulations, and this was a mandatory step for all Member States. Secondly, areas were identified as eligible for the 2019 scheme as they are facing other specific constraints. In Ireland's case, this process identified townlands as eligible areas of specific environmental importance, townlands facing structural issues relating to farm size, field size, farm fragmentation and the level of permanent grassland cover. So taken together, these steps have identified the lands deemed to be now eligible under the scheme. So what are the impact of these changes? This has been a lengthy project involving protracted technical engagement with the EU Commission. The outcome of this process can be summarised then as follows. For the vast majority of farmers who are eligible under the scheme until now, they remain eligible from 2019. 98% of the townlands which were eligible to date remain eligible. Some 700 townlands that would have previously been eligible will not now be eligible under the new designation. There are 760 farmers impacted financially by this change, but they will receive a degressive phasing out payment in 2019 of 80% and 2020 20% payment. In the majority of cases, the financial impact of this change is relatively small. Some 2,200 new townlands, 4,000 farmers, will now become eligible under the new approach, and these townlands will be eligible to receive a payment for the first time in 2019. Then, given the importance of this scheme to a large number of farmers, the Department is conscious of the need to ensure that the farmers are made aware of the changes. In addition to putting in place a series of meetings with stakeholders, the Department's website has published a list of eligible townlands by county, where farmers can check the status of the townland in which they hold land. A map representing this is also available to view online, and dedicated email and phone query support is in place. I think we may have circulated a map, Chairman, to members, so the copy of the map which is on the website. In addition, we are in the process of writing to farmers in relation to the process. For the vast majority of farmers, the letter will simply inform them that there has been no change in the status of any land that they hold. No further action is required of them at this stage. For farmers who hold land in townlands that will no longer be eligible in 2019, this letter will also set out some details of the appeals process that is being put in place. It is important that farmers can avail of such an appeals process, and arrangements are now being finalised to put in place an independently chaired appeals committee, which will also have appropriate technical expertise. It is important also for farmers to be aware that if they are in the process of appealing in relation to a particular townland, they can still apply for the scheme under the 2019 BPS and ANC application period opens next February. In Budget 2019, an additional €23 million was allocated to the ANC scheme. This means that the total allocation for the scheme has increased by some €50 million to €250 million over the last two budgets. Following on from the redesignation project, a proportion of the additional €23 million allocated in Budget 2019 will be spent on payments to farmers who will now be eligible for the first time under the scheme in 2019, and existing beneficiaries who are gaining new eligible land under the redesignation. The remaining allocation is expected to be allocated via increased payment rates across the land categories in the scheme. The Department has also held a series of meetings with farm bodies to update them on the current position with regard to the redesignation process and to seek their views on the shape of the scheme for 2019. It is not intended to change the existing eligibility requirements in the scheme, in particular the stocking rate requirement. However, views have been sought in relation to the level of categorisation of land within the scheme and the most targeted way of allocating the additional funds in 2019. And without preempting the outcome of these discussions, the Department would be in favour of continuing the current policy direction of targeting the highest level of funding at those areas experiencing the highest level of constraint or disadvantage. The feedback so far from the discussions is that the farmer organisations are broadly in favour of keeping the structure of the scheme similar to the 2018 scheme. So the next step then, the ANC scheme is a key part of Ireland's €4 billion rural development programme, which is co-funded by the EU. Given the changes required to the scheme for 2019, the RDP has to be formally amended, and the discussions with the EU Commission have commenced in this regard, with a view to providing clarity to farmers in advance of the application period, which starts in February 19. And in conclusion, Chairman, I'd like to thank the members of the committee again for taking the time to discuss the changes to the 2019 ANC scheme. As we've set out, the new designation, along with the increased financial allocation for the scheme, will both be implemented in 2019. And it's vital that the stakeholders and farmers are aware of these developments, and the Department continues to work towards ensuring that the ANC scheme can continue in its important role over the coming years. Colleagues and I are happy to discuss further with the committee, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Dillon, very much. First questioner is Deputy Cahill.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to the Department for the presentation and to Mr. Dillon. First of all, I have to express disappointment with our ability to get information on the changes. I tried everywhere over the weekend to get a list of the townslands that have been added, and for that matter, the townslands that have been taken out. I can get a list of all the eligible townlands in the country, but like in my county, there is changes, and unless you knew exactly who was in the last time, you don't know who has been added on this time. Now, in my own locality, I can identify townslands that have been added. But I think what I'd like today for guarantees that before the day is out, that we get a list of the townlands that have been put in extra, just a separate list, and also a list of the townlands that were excluded. Now, I'm not going to argue with your figures. I presume the townlands, like 700 townlands taken out and only affecting 760 farmers. I find that two figures hard to tally, but look, if that's what you say, I accept it. But definitely in my neck of the woods, townlands would be of greater scale than that, and the same with the 2,200 and 4,000 farmers getting in. But I would have to say, there has been there hasn't been the kind of extensive changes that we feared might have happened at the start. And, definitely in my part of Tipperary, there was areas that were discriminated against the last time on the basis of the income level in the area, and principally because there was a significant amount of dairy farmers in the area, and even though the land quality was, was definitely on the marshy side, they were excluded on the income criteria. And that has been excluded this time has obviously benefited that area, and in my view they've got their just reward. But I would like to see the list the way we can, that it's a lot easier for us to communicate with people and to say, you're in or you're out. So I would like the department to give us that list without delay. The other question I'd like to ask is, the percentage of the country now that's in must be, in the middle to high 70s. I presume it is, must be hitting around the 3/4, 75%. I would say of the country is receiving some disadvantaged area payment at this stage. How much hectares do we lose because of the ceiling that's attributed to each farmer? And exactly how many hectares are paid for? And I suppose what percentage is lost because of the ceiling? And I know that ceiling was reduced in the past, but could I just have how many hectares of the country that are eligible for payment but don't qualify because of the ceiling that's applied? And those, I suppose, Chairman, they're the questions. And in fairness to the department, they won't be accused of always criticising. I think there's been a good job of work done on this. And as I said, there was a lot of trepidation when a review of this was announced, whenever it was 2 or 3 years ago. And the changes are, fairly minimal, and we're definitely gaining more than we're losing, which wouldn't have been, definitely it was an outcome we'd have accepted when this review was first mooted. So, but I would like those, that detailed information to be supplied, please, Chairman.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive report. I suppose really the issue I want to get to is the issue of the categorisation of land within the scheme and where that will be, because most of the farmers certainly in the west or the northwest would either have fallen under what we would call the mountain type land, or the more severely, and the fairly badly severely handicapped as well. The less severely areas, I suppose, will be more in the Midlands and the south. And I'm just wondering, will it follow the same lines, or is there going to be much change, or do you expect to see much change within that? Also, in regard to the rates of payments, the rates of payments is something that we'd like to get a fair sense of. Will it stay similar, or will it be, as is suggested in your document, that areas experiencing the highest level of constraint or disadvantage would be prioritised? Is it going in that direction? Is that the way it's flowing? We're very conscious, particularly in regard to the climate change impact of this, that low intensity grazing upland type land, which farmers get it very hard to survive on, are providing a very solid public good by the way they farm. And the ANC payments is vital to keeping those people farming and keeping them out there doing what they're doing. Also, in regard to the exact townlands that have been left out and taken in, I think it would be useful to get some sense of where they are and to actually pin that down. The issue in respect of where this is going to go, I know there was additional money put in for it, and it's probably something we'd have to ask the Minister about when he comes. Last year there was an additional 23 million put into the budget. Is it expected, or in the context of this, and the context of if you like, a new emphasis on areas of natural constraint, would it be expected that we would see more funds go into the pot to try and ensure that this is a scheme that continues to deliver the public good that's set out to deliver? Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Deputy Penrose. Next, please.
Thank Paul and his colleagues there, and I think we shouldn't be churlish. We should congratulate the department and their officials for a job very well done. As I recall here, when this came about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, there was speculation that the whole roof was going to fall in. There was all sorts of things. There was people going out in the media and speculating and ill-founded speculation and causing worry to existing farmers who were in and to potential farmers who might try to get in. This has turned out to be a good news story. Let's cut out this old nonsense of always being down the thing. This is a good news story, and let's acknowledge it. Because at the end of the day, this new regulation, the EU regulation, has actually given us an opportunity to examine factors, biophysical factors and criteria that wasn't available in the previous scheme. And so it allows, and the first thing, of course, being very parochial, is I want to see, Paul, I want to find out what parts of Westmeath, I see lots of little bits of green there. I'm glad to see some of the parts, because the areas of Westmeath were excluded, and Longford, of course, in particular. Now, there's little bits of pink, but, I mean, there's criteria. There are objective criteria now, evaluated very clearly. And if some area is excluded, I can't be whinging about that because of the thing. So I think that's so. And as regard any scheme dealing with areas of natural constraints, it should be focused upon ensuring that the maximum compensation is clearly paid to those with the most or highest level of constraints. And I agree with Deputy Kenny that as evaluated, and evaluated on objective criteria, not some political thing. Let's get the objective criteria, and that has been greatly facilitated by the biophysical factors or criteria that are set out there, and it evaluated at townland level. And I always thought that was a good idea. Now, some people thought it wasn't, but and the analysis of the biophysical criteria can be used to, exceed the 60% threshold and then qualify thereafter. So I want to. Is it about 100,000 farmers will qualify? Is it or thereabouts for ANC payments? And 250 million, I think, is the pot. Is it going forward? How much additional money will be required to deal with the increased number of areas or townlands designated, or more? If there's 700 townlands taken out and there's 3,000 additional, or 3,300 is it coming in, or 4,000 coming in, that's a net additional 3,300 townlands or farmers, and 1,500 new townlands. So that would be they'll now be all come eligible for payments for 2019 hours. Am I right? Will they be about they'll consume about 11 or 12 million of the additional 23 million? Am I right? Roughly that. And that means there's another 11 million or thereabouts, 11 to 12, depending on how it works out, available for the existing farmers. So there's going to be that amount maybe available to increase the bias of payment for those who are most constrained, which is the objective of this. So those are the factors that I think need to be taken into account in that regard. I'm glad to see that. How soon will the next stage of the implementation process of the ANC review be carried out, because you have to get down to, I suppose, refining it and notifying people who are not included. And the appeals process, I'm interested in that, of course, always an appeals process. Independent chairpersons, is it going to be just one independent chairperson, or is it going to be somebody with scientific knowledge of dealing with those biophysical criteria? You can't be putting somebody in who hasn't a clue. I want to make sure that there's people who have knowledge of the various criteria. And I was interested that when you did the biophysical criteria, you had the additional factors which dealt and permitted the refinement of the eligible land. And of course, the stocking rate levels, the higher they were, and the more arable they were, and land cover didn't cover one of the issues there. They were going to be excluded. Those are the dominant parameters, I suppose. They were part of the exclusion, but you balance that with the specific constraints, especially with fragmentation, which is fairly predominant down in the west of Ireland. That would be a very important issue, and I think that's the level of grassland cover there would be that will dealing with rock outcrop and all like that. That would be a very important factor there. But 98% of the existing farmers are going to be townlands are going to remain eligible, and that's a very specific figure in that regard. So, I mean, it's a goodish news story in comparison to where we started off. And like Deputy Cahill, I was rooting around trying to find out what parts of Westmeath and Longford were in, but I'm not very good with maps anyhow. So, but I'll take your word on it that when you'll give me a rough idea of where they're in. But well done to you all in this regard.
Thanks, Deputy. I think we'll take every questioner. Is that all right? Are you happy enough with that? Okay. Next is Senator Conway-Walsh, please.
So my questions are predicated on what the answers might be to some of the questions that I've already put, but I want to ask you, is the mountain grazing area retained? That's one question. And have the two lowland types, the more severely impacted and the less severely impacted, been retained? And I just want to ask you around the amount of flexibility you had. I know you cite in terms of what you're directed to do by the EU, but maybe just what are your areas of flexibility there? Just in terms of the extra 50 million, if you're saying that there's an extra 4,000 being bought into the ANC, is that divided amongst them then? I suppose what I'm trying to get at is, obviously this scheme is designed to compensate for areas that are most severely impacted, and what I want to ask you is, how is that being done? So where the highest constraints are, the most severe constraints, how have you balanced it so that the payments will be made to those areas?
Okay. Deputy Fitzmaurice, please.
First of all, thanks for your presentation. On the face of it, it looks pretty good. I'm for just one question, Paul. No more than the other deputies, where can we get the information? I don't know, is it around Shannon Bridge or Aircourt or on that country in Galway? There's a small bit there. Where can we get the information re the townlands that's coming out? Second of all, what was the criteria that you used sort of to put areas in that maybe, I see a few bits down south there that I would have imagined is fairly goodish ground. And thirdly, what's the rates that it will now be, and what's the limits? Is there, with the extra, I think it's 23 million this year and there was 25 million before, and maybe 50 million altogether, over, say, to be over a 3 or 4 year period. What's the rates going to be on the different sections and the maximum amount that can be drawn down? Is that increasing like it was in 2008 or before the crash came? And you talk about the appeal system. Could you explain where is the appeal system, say, for the ones that will be appealing? Where is that to, or who's handling that appeal? Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Deputy. And Deputy Brown, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Department, for their statements here. Obviously, the ANC payment is a hugely important part of farming income, and I think, you know, in the overall, it appears a good job is done. But I have to, I suppose, focus on my own county of Wexford, which does seem to be one of the hardest hit areas. So it does, and for those particular farmers down in that area who are recovering from several fodder crises, including storms, including snow, and now from a drought, many of them are only beginning to get themselves right again. Can you tell me how many townlands in Wexford are being taken out? How many farmers in Wexford that's going to affect? When will these farmers be notified that they're being taken out? Do you know the loss of value in terms of income to the county of Wexford? And just to clarify, the 60% threshold for townlands that takes a townland out, was that decided by the Court of Auditors, or was that set locally here in Dublin?
Okay. Just before I go back to Mr. Dillon's question, with regard the appeals process, maybe if you could tell a bit more about the appeals process, when it might start, and those, is it just specifically for those who lost out on this occasion, who have been excluded, or is it that there will be a group of farmers who have had the expectation of being included in this occasion, who felt disappointed not being included maybe in the past? Are they eligible to qualify for the appeals process? And how is that process, how do you instigate the process, and again the timescale that's involved? So Mr. Dillon, now and your colleagues, whenever you're ready.
Okay. I might ask my colleagues to answer some of the questions as we're going along, but start with Deputy Call's first question. Can we get the list of the townlands that are in and that are out? We'll arrange that. We can give them to you on a county basis. We'll pull them out on a county basis and we'll give them to you
You're right, Hugh, tonight. You're barely a lot of interest in it.
We're writing to all the farmers affected. So, as we said, an awful lot of the farmers won't have any adverse impact, so they'll get a letter saying no change. But the tricky thing for us is we also have a lot of farmers who have some townlands coming out, some townlands staying the same, and some townlands coming in for the first time. So we have to basically make absolutely sure that those letters are right, and that's what we're working on at the minute. So that's our immediate priority, is to get that official notification out to them of the impact.
You can still give us the list, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. We get to the list on a county basis of the number of townlands that are in and the number of townlands that are out. On a related question, I might ask Thomas if he wants to talk about the percentages and so on in terms of the national level.
Yeah, just pick up on a couple of things there. So your first query regarding the fact that there's only 700 odd farmers or 760 impacted across 700 townlands. Financially impacted, I suppose what we're saying. So because the current scheme design, as you know, and have referenced already, farmers get paid up to a maximum. So if you have 100 hectares of land, the scheme maxes out at 30. So for some of these farmers, while there is a loss in terms of what was designated land, it hasn't a financial loss on the farmer. And similarly, people may have had tillage crops in the past, and hence the loss of the land isn't a financial loss. So there's over 2,000 farmers farming those townlands, but approximately the 760 where it actually has a financial impact on the farm. So that's just to explain. And similarly, in the positive coming in as well, with regard to the 2,000, we estimate there's over 4,000, but again, history has shown us with the scheme that not all farmers apply for the scheme. So it's approximately 4,000, but we're surprised every year certain farmers perhaps don't fulfil the stocking obligations or just don't apply for whatever personal reason. So there's an element of estimation on what people will do next year. In terms of there was two particular questions you asked there about the percent. One would have to come back to you, Deputy Ann, which I think you're asking about how many hectares are in effect not paid on due to the ceiling issue. So I think you're asking, again, how many hectares, while eligible due to the scheme limits. Some of that, though, is dependent on what will be the new scheme limits, as in whether we carry over the 30 or the 34 hectare limits. And I think, as Paul has already alluded to, we've been talking to the farm bodies about that. I think broadly everyone's acceptance that there would be a cap of some sort or a limit. So some of those figures will depend on.
Well, I'd be happy I could get the 2018 figures.
Okay, so look at the 2018 ones too.
I said that to the committee, is that all right?
Yeah, not on at all, yeah. The other question you'd asked then was with regards to, I think, the percent now constrained. So what we have roughly now, there's 3.5 million hectares in 2018 constrained. We're looking at somewhere around just over 3.7 million hectares will be constrained. There's a net gain between the 2018 and 2019 scheme. The total UAA in the country, I don't have exactly at the moment for me, so I can send you back an explicit figure, but we're looking at over 100,000 hectares of an increase, and we're over 3.7 million hectares now potentially eligible for payment in the scheme. So I'll give you the percent just to be sure, but they're the figures. Okay.
Deputy Kenny asked us about the categorisation of the land, and will it follow the same lines roughly as it had before? Broadly speaking, that's the thrust of the consultation we've had with the farm bodies so far, and that's our thinking broadly speaking as well, that we would stay with pretty much the same delineation. So what was regarded as mountain or mountain type grazing before would still be mountain or mountain type. The more severely handicapped would pretty much still be the same kind of areas, and then less severely handicapped would be pretty much the same areas, but broadly speaking. So that's the way we're thinking anyway. In terms of the actual rates we pay, as I said, we have had a round of consultations with the farm bodies. The issue then is, how much money have we available to spend? How much money is taken up by the new entrants, so to speak, the people coming in? The figure for them, the new people coming in for the first time, is probably over the order of about 10 million. They're about 10 and so 10 or 11 that's left to actually spend after we accommodate the people who are coming in for the first time. So that then allows us headroom to give increases across all the existing people who are in there already. And that's what the discussion is with the farm bodies at the minute, what way they would see the greatest increases going.
You expect the new ones coming in will be all in the less severely handicapped areas?
That's right, yeah. Logic would say that they would, yeah, absolutely. And if you think about when we had an extra 25 million to distribute last year for 2018, the way in which that was approached by the Minister and ourselves was, the greatest level of increase in terms of percentages and in terms of the volume of money went to the people in the mountain type category. and so on down along through the categories. So our thinking would be, and the farm bodies seem to indicate that that's the way they see it as well for now, that we would apply the same logic. Whatever money is available to be redistributed to people who are there and were there beforehand, that we would distribute it in that fashion as well.
So there won't be much movement, for instance, from people who would be on more severely handicapped area the last time that would come into less severely handicapped. You don't see much movement around that?
No, we don't. We don't. No. Okay. No, that's the thinking at the minute anyway, and that's the feedback we're getting from the farm bodies as well in terms of how we actually redistribute the available money that's left.
Is there a map available showing the different categories?
Yeah, we can get you the map.
Yeah, I think that would be useful to see.
Yeah.
We'll get again, send it to the committee. And,
yeah, we can.
Yeah,
absolutely.
please.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
We'll all come here. We'll come through. We'll look after you.
Okay.
Always do, Mike.
Okay, Deputy Penrose, okay, thank you for the comments about the way in which it's gone so far. As I said, we will supply the details of on a county level of the townlands that are in and the townlands that are out. And as I said, we know how many farmers are coming in for the first time. We treat them as if they are coming into the less severely handicapped. Then we know roughly how much money that's going to take, and then that'll tell us how much money we have available. The appeals process, it will be an independent chair. It will also be supported by independent technical advice, and we'll have admin support for it as well. So that's in the process of being set up at the minute. It has to be somebody who's broadly acceptable to all the stakeholders, and that's what we're doing at the minute.
Somebody who knows something.
Sorry?
Somebody who knows something about soils.
Yes, absolutely. The technical expert will have to be somebody who knows something about soil, because what they'll be doing is they'll be reviewing the interpretation that was taken by... Yeah, so they're going through that process, so they have to know what that process is.
Site visits?
There can be, but that's entirely up to the committee.
Okay.
So, come back to your question, Chair, if I may take them out of order.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
We will be setting up the committee straight away, and the Minister will make an announcement about that. We will be writing to the farmers who are being adversely affected, so they will be told of the right of appeal, and they will simply have to say to us, write back and say you wish to appeal. That's all they have to do at the outset. Then we will be able to tell them the reason for them either being dropped out of the scheme altogether or for not getting in. In other words, which of the biophysical criteria they failed, or which of the fine-tuning parts that they failed, and so on. So that will then allow them to focus their appeal. There's no point in making it any longer than that. That's why there's a two-step process here. So that's the way we'll do it. That won't take too long. In terms of the timeline then for actually getting through it, the 2019 scheme will open in February in tandem with the BPS scheme for 2019. The closing date is the 15th of May. Anybody who's in doubt should apply anyway, for both just by ticking the box on the BPS form, same as they would have done before. The critical time for us then is to have all those appeals decided upon in time for payments, which is kind of autumn of 2019. So that's the available window, if you like, for all that work to be done and dusted. So
just one question. Is there any criteria in it, say, for, I'd be looking at some areas there that may be small farms. Is there anything to help those small farms if they were caught in that area that was coming out? Say a small farmer that might have 20, 30 acres, that the likes of the ANC was fierce important to them. Is there anything there among the a la carte of stuff that you look at? Is there any...
So they pick up within what's called specific constraints. So where the process that led us to the current map had included what's known as specific constraint, and one of those had small farm size. So I think it's less than 80% of the national average. So it's already built into what we've achieved in terms of this final process, as in farmers, smaller holdings, fragmented holdings, which in themselves, respective to land quality, can have an impact on the viability. So it's already in there. That data. But again, I suppose the appeals process, when we would be able to tell people why they haven't got in, they can look at that and see if there is a particular issue they want to bring to us or the committee.
A brief comment.
Yeah, it's just brief in relation to the islands and the status of the islands. Is first, has that been sorted? And I just ask you in relation to, say, one of the islands even near myself, it's within a mile of me at home, the Barn Island, and they have waited for the last 3 years, the landowners on there, to establish whether they meet the criteria or not. And is there somebody specifically within the department who will deal with the island status?
take that. The island scheme will remain unchanged. As an entity, it remains unchanged, separate from the discussions ongoing today. It remains as an area of specific constraint. I'm not exactly sure of the geographic location in relation to that island, but the basic criteria for an island to be eligible for the scheme is an offshore island with no permanent land bridge to the island. So we have the equivalent of Valencia and Achill wouldn't qualify because they have a permanent land bridge, whereas the other offshore islands. The only islands which are sort of more inland are within the Shannon estuary. So that would be it. But I can take on board if you want to. I am the person responsible. So if you wish to contact myself, I can look into that case specifically for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll just carry on the more questions or anything. Okay, go ahead. We'll come back then. If there's more questions, we'll come back afterwards.
See, we covered the information in the townlands. We covered the criteria you used. I think Thomas dealt with that. We covered the extra money and how it's proposed to distribute the extra money. I think that was covered already.
As regards Townsland in Wexford, number of farmers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms, I think the first one, the number of townlands, as we've already committed to, we'll provide the list, so you'll be able to see the change. Also, we've mentioned that we are writing to all farmers that are coming out or in fact getting new land or staying the same. So those letters are issuing at the moment. It'll take a while to get the full over 100,000 letters out. I think your last question was in that threshold, that biophysical 60%. That's within the regulations. So there's 60% of what they call the utilisable agricultural area, or the agricultural area in the townland, had to be constrained for it to be deemed biophysically constrained. So it's within the regulations, and that is that obviously does imply that there are areas that would have some constraint but don't hit the 60 and hence don't get in.
Sorry, just to cover, that 60% was decided with the Court of Auditors, with all the others?
Well, it would have, the Court of Auditor view of the last scheme would have fed into the discussions throughout Europe about the need to move to biophysical, and then that percentage was put in as part of the 2013 discussions on the regulation. So the court would have said it needs to move to biophysical, and then the exact biophysical and the exact thresholds were part of the negotiation, the reformed of the cap the last time. So it's in the regulations now, 60%.
But was it put in as a recommendation from Dublin or from Europe?
It was negotiated at the time the regulations were being written. I honestly I'm not aware that it was something the court explicitly said 60, to be honest straight with you, but it's in the regulations, so it's not within our remit. It went into the regulations, we had to apply it.
Okay. I think we've addressed most of the questions.
I think we have. If we don't, we'll be happy to go back over them. I'm not sure.
Anything else before any other questions, members? And before we.
I'm just doing the maths there. 25 million, I think, was something like 260 or 70 euro to everyone in the last batch. And when you bring the new people in, how would it be? About 100 euro, going by what I'm looking at, is the increase across the board. Would that be fair to say?
If we were to give the same amount to everybody.
Does that look like...
when we had the extra money for 2018, it was agreed that the way it should be done was the people with the worst land should get the biggest increase. So we'll probably apply the same logic again this time.
Kenny, yeah.
We set out clearly, we have more green areas in than we have pink areas out, and I assume that those areas are areas that met one of the constraint. What do we call them? The menu that was there of the various things that categorise physical constraints. Is there a formula in which you decide where they are severely disadvantaged or less severely? Do they have to have 2 or 3, or is there some formula you come in with there, or is it just a kind of an ad hoc based on what was before? I'd like to get clarity on that. Also, in regard to Deputy Fitzmaurice's question in regard to the money and how it's divided out, I think before it might have been exactly what it was close enough to a 3-2-1 sort of a formula that it was divided up in that kind of way. If that were to be done again, it would make a big difference, because I'm very conscious of particularly farmers in the west and the northwest where they had very heavies. Like they probably take all of the boxes, never mind one of them or 2 of them. And I'm very conscious that the need to try and make sure that while farmers everywhere need support and need to be helped, and need to get every assistance possible to ensure that they are productive and that they have sustainable farms. This is a scheme which is about the constraint of the land, and therefore should be paid on that. And I think that we shouldn't lose that focus in respect of it. That it's about the constraint, and from that point of view, I'd like to get a reassurance that that there is a clear commitment to pay it on that basis.
Take that first of all, then we'll go back to Deputy Cahill.
So just to address the first question with regard to the biophysical, just explain how it worked. So to be deemed biophysically constrained, you had to have at least one of the criteria that's listed there, at least 60% of the townland. So, for example, some townlands simply had one, over 60% applying, whereas you've rightly pointed out others had all of them. But within the regulations it was at least 60% of the utilisable agricultural area had to be constrained. There was then, as we set out in the statement there, the need to fine-tune, as in effect, look at, in our case, use stocking rate and arable, and the effects that people had managed or had learned to live with or function with the constraint, and hence they became fine-tuned out. So in terms of, let's call it the pink areas you're looking at, some would not have hit the biophysical, so they might have got over the 60, others may have hit it, but then with regard to fine-tuning may have come back out, and then there's specific constraints as well going on. So different pink areas, using the colouring in the map there, are not in the new scheme due to different reasons. Some just didn't hit the biophysical, others did, but were in effect fine-tuned out due to the level of stock and or the level of arable. I think in broad terms, the second one, we have had discussions with all the farm bodies. All the discussions are sort of broadly in agreement that the money would, I think if you suggested, move towards the areas of most constraint. So with regard to both the last and the percent increase and the amount increase was larger in the mountain areas. So I think we would see that same direction happening for the reallocation or the allocation of monies to these areas in the new scheme.
Just the time frame for appeals, when do you envisage? Because I suppose to have them done by the 1st of May would be important. Is that envisaged to be practical?
Chairman, it all depends with the appeals, how many we actually get. So we will set up the process straight away. As I said, we will be writing to all the affected farmers, so they will be able to appeal straight away. As soon as they get their letter, they'll be able to lodge their appeal. We'll make every effort to get them done in time for the closing date of the 15th of May. And as I said, even if they're not fully concluded at that stage, our advice to the farmers would be, apply for the ANC scheme anyway, and we will have the work done then when it comes to payment time, so they won't lose out. It's easier than do it the other way around and not apply, because that creates problems with the EU then, because the farmer hasn't actually committed to abiding with the terms and conditions of the scheme. Chairman, I might mention one other thing as well that we didn't mention already, and that is that the new regulation requires us to have an element of what they call degressivity in the payment, what we call front loading. So we have to pay a higher rate for the first so many hectares than we do in each of the tiers. So you will see we haven't actually settled on what the first more hectares. But say, for example, if it was 10, you pay more for the first 10 hectares for a farm than you do for the rest. And we have to have that within each of the 3 categories. Okay. We're required to do that. That wasn't there for all the categories before.
Deputy
Penrose. Final question. Even those who lose out, they're going to get a couple of years payments, isn't it?
2 years.
So it's 80%, 20%?
Yes.
Over 2 years?
Yes.
So even they'll go to 2019, 2020, they're still getting a couple of shillings.
That's in the regulation, yeah.
Okay, another question before we wrap up? Okay. Thanks, Mr. Dillon and your colleagues for coming before us today, and you'll supply us with the information that you have in due course. Appreciate that very much. Thanks for coming before me today. That's no further business this matter.